Thank you very much. Well, good evening, and good evening to our audience live streaming. This is a special meeting of the Parents Advisory Council. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Jennifer Smitkin with us this evening, and the topic is going to be our students' mental health. That's first and foremost in our minds. And I don't know
Thank you
whether
very
this
much.
will
Well,
be
good evening,
part of your presentation,
and good evening
to Dr. Smitkin, but maybe along the way, some of this, our mental health is also tied into they are mutually interactive here, and they benefit one another. But we are very fortunate to have Dr. Smitkin with us this evening to address this very important topic that we are all concerned with as we go through this pandemic. Our students have experienced feelings of isolation, anxiety, the stress of this entire experience has really impacted our families. So, Dr. Smitkin, thank you for joining us this evening, and I will let you introduce yourself, and we'll begin.
Thank you, Mr. Kaur. And thank you all so much for having me here tonight. I'm excited to share this presentation with you all. It's a presentation of coping in the era of COVID-19. I'm Dr. Jennifer.
All right. We'll see you later.
I'm working right now at Psychology Wellness Practice, which is a private psychological practice just down the road in Colony. And we do evaluations for students and therapy for students as well. And I do parental consultations and school consultations. So I feel equipped to bring this information to you because we haven't skipped a beat. In fact, we've been seeing more students than ever in the era of COVID-19. And the experiences range, but in many ways they're all very similar because we are all in this together. And so I'll be speaking tonight about how we as the adults in the students' lives can model certain behaviors, certain coping patterns, and how we can all work together. And so much of what I'll be talking about will be applicable for adults as well as our children and applicable for all ages. I will just ask before I start the presentation, I'm happy to take questions at the end if we have some time. I expect probably to go until maybe around 8 o'clock. But I might ask that you hold any questions that you might share in a chat box until right at the end when I'm starting to show resources and references that you can use. I do expect that I'm going to be presenting information on such a broad scale tonight that much of it will be applicable maybe to some more specific questions that you might have. I am also going to be presenting some very common questions that parents ask, that parents have been asking since March when this first started. So I'll be starting on a very broad general scale, and then I'm going to be very specific at the end with questions that seem to come up a lot for parents. So thank you. Okay, I believe I have shared my screen. So we're going to be talking about coping in the era of COVID-19, and let's see. For some reason, it's not allowing me to change the slide as it was before. So I apologize for that. There we go. Okay. So I'll just be starting, like I talked about, very generally, talking about how we've all been adjusting to this changing landscape. And then what I'd like to do on that general scale is talk to you about coping from a biopsychosocial spiritual perspective. That's how I practice in my personal practice. I come up with recommendations related to the biological sphere of life, the social sphere of life, the psychological sphere of life, and also the spiritual and purpose and meaning sphere of our lives. And so that's what I'd really like to do for you. And then I'll be getting into more of those specific questions. So part of the problem with COVID-19, as we know, and with the impact that it's had, is that there's been so much uncertainty about it. Things have changed. What we thought we knew, we no longer know. What we thought was true may no longer be true. That is how it goes with science and medicine. However, uncertainty is a breeding ground for anxiety. Anxiety really wants to know what's coming next, and it wants to plan and prepare. And so one of the reasons that we're seeing such a spike in anxiety for students and for adults is because there is just so much uncertainty around COVID-19. The good news is, like I said, we're all in this together. And the bad news is the protocols that have been put in place to keep us safe are the very things that are actually keeping us away from one another. Quarantine, lockdown, social distancing. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. No surprise, there's been pretty significant mental health fallout. It's had a significant impact on the mental health of communities globally, specifically related to increases in anxiety and depression. And some estimates have found that about 20% of children demonstrated clinically significant levels of anxiety and depression. That means sort of like diagnosable, way above and beyond what would be expected under normal circumstances within 1 month of home confinement, 1 month of being home. This was research that was conducted after the lockdown that occurred over the spring. So let's start with, what I like to do is basically say, let's take control of what we have control over. Very little of this did we have any control over, but I still like to focus on what we do have control over, because that does tend to reduce anxiety and also give hope. So I'm going to start with the biological sphere of life. And as I talk about this, some of these recommendations are not popular, especially with preteens and teenagers. So I recognize that, because we're going to be talking about sleep and eating healthy and exercising, probably things that we all knew were helpful anyway, but I'm just going to explain why they're helpful in the era of COVID-19. And if you're a person like me who likes to take control of things that she has control over, and these would be some recommendations that you could use. So number one, sleep is essential for immune function. We want to have good immune function in the era of COVID-19. I see many, many students who are experiencing anxiety about possibly contracting the disease. And so I talk to them about what they do have control over. And one of those things is improving their immune system with, taking action. So sleep does improve immune function, and it improves brain function, which means lower levels of anxiety and depression. So the quality of sleep that we get is just as important as the quantity. We all know that we're supposed to get between 8 to 10 hours of sleep, 11 if you have younger children. But the quality of sleep is really about how early the kids are going to sleep and how early the adults are too. In fact, the research shows that the greater the number of pre-midnight hours of sleep an individual gets, the higher the levels of serotonin in their body. So serotonin is associated with low levels of anxiety and depression. People who have high levels of anxiety or high levels of depressed mood tend to have low serotonin. So one of the things that I work on with these individuals is getting to bed a little bit earlier and getting the right amount of sleep. But it's specifically the pre-midnight hours of sleep that are associated with increasing serotonin levels and also optimizing immune function. So we probably could figure this out. An 8-hour sleep from midnight to 8 o'clock is a very different quality of sleep than an 8-hour night of sleep from, let's say, 8 o'clock to 4 a.m. in the morning. The earlier bedtime is going to optimize and increase the quality of the sleep, and therefore increase the quality of the amount of serotonin and the immune function. So next, of course, we all know we're supposed to eat healthy, but what does that even mean? And how does that relate to COVID-19? Okay, so digestive health, which is, when we talk about that, we're kind of talking about the microbiome. We have all these little critters that are living in our microbiome. Some of them are good, some of them are not good. The balance of those little critters actually does dictate our mental or our brain health, because our digestive system actually talks to our brain. So you kind of got to think, who do we want talking to our brain? Do we want the happy guys, or do we want the mean and not so nice guys talking to the brain? Well, the happy guys, if you have a lot of those in your stomach, they're going to be sending hopeful messages. I can get through this day. I feel a little bit nervous, but I felt this way before and I can get through it again. Those are positive messages. Believe it or not, those are messages that can be sent from the digestive system to the brain. The not so great bugs that are in our digestive system send the not so great messages to our brain. So they'll send the messages like, I really don't even feel like I can get out of bed today. What's the point of going to school? We're just going to get sent home tomorrow. The messages that lead to anxiety and depression. Those are living organisms, what I was just talking about, that microbiome, the gut bacteria. What do they eat? Well, they eat fiber to survive. So think fruits and vegetables. This is one of the reasons why it's really important to eat healthy, but we never really think about it this way. The other problem with eating unhealthy is that spikes in blood sugar, which you'll get from, like sugary foods or junk foods, suppress the immune system. It's the spike in blood sugar that can suppress the immune system. So if you have a child who is really in tune with their body and really interested in physical health, then you could appeal to that child in a coping perspective from this biological intervention sphere. Exercise, of course, is also essential for optimizing immune function. So it's sleep, diet, and exercise. And you just have to know if that approach would work for your child in terms of reducing any anxiety associated with COVID. The next one is the biggest one. Adopting a growth mindset. Now, this type of mindset is something that's very well known in the educational sphere because it's used by that. We can take a problem and we could look at it from this really innovative perspective. We can look at a problem as a challenge that we're excited to find a solution for. We can look at uncertainties and say, this is a really good opportunity for me to learn something new or to grow from this. That's a little easier for adults, but we still do struggle with that. Imagine how hard that is for children. Yet, adopting a growth mindset of, I can grow from this, I can learn from this, something good will come from this, is associated with significantly lower levels of anxiety and depression. The opposite of the growth mindset is the fixed mindset. And that's the belief that it's just like it is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing I can do to change this. There's nothing I can do to affect this. I can't even affect the way that I feel. And that, as you probably could guess, does lead to a sense of hopelessness and certainly a spike in anxiety. So one of the biggest things that we as adults can do in these students' lives is understand and learn about the growth mindset and then use the language around the students. Model what it's like to face a challenge, to identify a challenge, and identify it in such a way that you're almost invigorated by the idea of going to be over. We are going to be so much more equipped if anything like this ever happens again. We'll definitely be stronger for it. So this is a great chart, and if you're able to, I would encourage you to print this out and even put it on your refrigerator. What kind of mindset do I want to have during COVID-19? Okay, so we're striving for the right-hand side. The left-hand side, that's where we want to steer away from. So what's the problem? The problem is that COVID-19 is making people sick all over the world. Many of you may have heard your children use these words. People are getting sick everywhere, all around me. Well, the fixed mindset would say to that problem, I'm scared and worried about what's happening and it's out of my control. And as you just sit and think about those words for a minute, you probably could imagine feeling scared and worried about being scared and worried that this is out of your control. So it's not a helpful mindset when faced with this particular problem. The growth mindset understand how it impacts me and my family. So the growth mindset is saying, okay, there's a little bit that I can do to control this. I can control how much information I consume so that if I know better, I could do better. And then one step even further than that would be the innovation mindset, which says I can use the information that I learn to make the most of this situation. So I can learn it and then I can use it. I'll do one more for you. Schools are closed and children are learning from home. Obviously, this is a problem. The fixed mindset of a child might sound like, I can't learn if I don't go to school. But the growth mindset would say, I can keep learning if I put in the effort and stay motivated. The problem hasn't changed, and this is what's key when we're talking to our kids. as you notice, you're going across the column, but the problem stays the same. Schools are closed or closing intermittently, and children are learning from home. So we could either think about that like, well, I guess I'm not going to learn, or we could talk with our kids and sort of plant the idea that you can keep learning. You just have to probably try a little harder, put in a more effort, and stay motivated. That's a tricky one, because a lot of kids will say, well, I don't want to do that. But it's really just about changing the language from can't to, well, I could if I chose to, because the if I chose to part is so important. That's the control. That's giving the control back to the child. Saying I can't do this means that the child has absolutely no control over what's going on, and that creates that feeling of anxiety and certainly depression. Now, the innovation mindset would say I have a unique opportunity to learn new skills and to try something that I've never done before. And again, it's hard for us as adults to even get there, but man, think about the difference between the gray column. I can't learn if I don't go to school, versus, all right, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, hopefully, to learn some new stuff and try something that I've never had to do before, and hopefully I never have to do again. You can see how really the way that you think about it is going to lead to the way that you feel about it. So if we as the adults around these students can adopt this language and this growth and innovation mindset, then hopefully we will they will start to pick up on that language and use it themselves. This is another way of interpreting that chart that I just showed you. You can see, who do I want to be during the COVID? And I think we would come up with some really beautiful answers, but sometimes in actuality, the way that we're behaving every day doesn't lead us closer to that goal of being who we actually would like to be during the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's 3 zones that are coming out of this question. There's a fear zone that could dictate who you are. There's a learning zone and a growth zone. So, a couple from the fear zone. I grab food, toilet paper, and medications that I don't need. That's behaving. Who do I want to be during the COVID-19 era? I'm going to be someone who acts out of fear. And certainly there was at least enough fear to go around when this first started, and we knew very, very little about it. And kids will pick up on that. They'll pick up on that from the adults. What we would want from them is to pick up on the learning and then the growth opportunity. So the learning zone is, I'm going to just give up what I can't control. I'm going to become aware of the situation and think how I'm going to act, and I'm going to evaluate information before spreading something false. And the growth zone says, I think of others and I see how to help them. So unless we are able to help ourselves first, we wouldn't be able to get to that growth zone where we're looking out and thinking about how we can help others. So you can see how you have to kind of get almost outside of yourself as you move further and further out from the circle in order to break out of the restriction that the anxiety, could create. I live in the present and focus on the future. I'm empathetic with myself and others. I thank and appreciate others. Really, if you read those and you allow those to resonate, if you even write them, sometimes I'll say, write this and put it on your bathroom mirror so that you see it every morning. If you choose something from the growth zone and you model that for your kids, or you model that for your students, maybe you write it on the board or something, and you have a weekly affirmation or a daily affirmation, it becomes reality. So I keep a happy emotional state and spread hope. When was the last time you could look at yourself and say, I spread hope today? But that as a daily reminder, as a weekly affirmation for your class, for your kids, can really do wonders. And it's again, modeling that growth mindset for the kids who have less experience with it. We as adults have much more experience having to be resilient. We've just had more experiences that needed resilience, but they haven't stacked up nearly as many as we have. So we need to show them through our own behavior, model for them how to think about it and how to behave with it. So like I said, the best psychological intervention that you can do is figure out what you or your child has control over and take it back. So relative to learning from home, which our students have had to do, I'm a really big proponent of designating a workspace that's separate from the bedroom. I really truly believe that the bedroom should be for changing clothes and for sleeping. I think that the more that we can use it just for those two things, the easier it will be for kids to fall asleep. Right now kids are doing homework in their beds. They're doing classes from their beds. They're watching movies in their beds. The bed is really just a place to sleep, and that's, I believe, why some children have trouble sleeping, is because their brain is associating the bed with activity, and sometimes a lot of activity if it's on a screen a lot in bed. So I'd love for students to be able to have a workspace outside of their bedroom, especially if they don't have room outside of the bedroom, especially out of their bed. Meditation can help with anxiety, depression, stress reduction, and concentration, even if you just do it for 5 minutes a day. And again, it would be about modeling this behavior for your kids. Just sitting quietly with your eyes closed. They might think that you're taking a nap, and maybe they'll ask you what you're doing. But instead of saying, napping or resting my eyes, you could say, I'm meditating, when the natural question is, what is meditating? And you can explain it's a way to sort of purposefully try to shut your mind off, knowing that there will be thoughts that come in and out, allowing them to do that, but then really, again, just trying to focus on your breathing, focus on, just how it feels to be calm. And that can really improve elements of depression and anxiety. Okay. Do not Google symptoms or diseases. This goes for everyone, including our kids. There's just a lot of misinformation out there, of course. And I do also believe that sometimes too much information is not healthy for us. So getting just the right amount, and you'll know when you have too much when it starts to feel not so great. You'll know you've watched a little too much news when you're not feeling really great while you're watching the news. And you'll know that you've maybe read a little bit too much about COVID or symptoms when you're starting to feel really uncomfortable or not so great. Also avoid frequently checking the latest COVID-19 statistics. They're not going to change just because you check them, and they're not going to change just because you don't check them. So again, sometimes less is more with information. Avoid speculation and stick to facts. And definitely, we should be talking to our kids about not feeling any certain uncomfortable way about asking for help, or about needing to talk about, their feelings about coping. Socially, this is a tricky one, of course, because remember, the way that we're getting through this is actually by being less together. So I try to work with the kids in my office on focusing what we can do rather than what we cannot do. So it goes along with that idea of take control of what you have and accept what you do not have. Looking at it this way, socially, this is a new chance. This is the growth mindset. This is a chance to reframe, we can model resilience for our kids and then demonstrate that growth mindset. So it's a really good time to get back to social basics. Believe it or not, we used to socialize as humans without screens. We probably can't remember a time that happened, but this is a really good opportunity to get outside in the cold and fresh air without electronics. And the things that our kids could do together, depending on parental level of comfort, would be things like hiking, biking, sledding, skiing, snowshoeing. Outdoor activities are safer than indoor activities. And physical activity, that's a great idea. Fresh air, really very healthy for you. And spending time and connecting with loved ones and friends, also very important. So helping our children, many of the kids that I'm working with are just focusing on what they can't do. I can't have a sleepover with my friend. I cannot have a birthday party. What can you do? Okay, it's going to look different. We already know this, but what can you do? And there's a lot more sometimes than we even realize. And then, to be honest with you, I've had a hard time getting through COVID and coping with COVID without thinking, my gosh, what is the purpose of all this? Is there any greater meaning to any of this? And to be honest with you, from a spiritual perspective, there's a huge overlap with that growth mindset. So the growth mindset actually was developed by a clinical psychologist who's a PhD at a university. And she did all this research, and she's the one that coined the term fixed and growth mindset. But interestingly, for those who I work with who really want to tap into that meaning and purpose and that higher power and spirituality, and specifically, those who may be Christian, I have two verses here that have helped individuals to kind of connect. Okay, there's the psychology behind coping, and then there's this higher meaning and purpose. And so one of the verses is, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." Sounds a lot like the growth mindset. Hey, listen, this is really hard right now, but guess what? You can be of good cheer, because when this is over, you are going to be so much stronger than when you began. And I talk to kids about it in this way. Listen, especially to teenagers who are, really into physical fitness, maybe are into sports. To build muscle, you have to do strength training. And with strength training, there's pain associated with that. If you're not in pain, you might not be doing it right. Over time, and with training and with pain, your muscles are stronger. So the analogy, okay, we're going through emotional pain right now. This is strength training. We are getting stronger. Pain is a part of the process. And over time, with more strength training, the longer we go through this process, and whatever pain might be associated with it, we will be stronger as a result of it. I joke with my husband and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm really excited to go running until I actually go running, and then it hurts so bad." And he yells at me and he laughs at me, really. And he says, "Jen, working out is painful sometimes." It was like, okay, as long as I know that it's supposed to be painful, then I can kind of get through it, knowing that, okay, everyone's having a similar experience, and it's working, right, when I'm all done. So that analogy can sometimes work really well for kids. So I'm going to move into some very common questions that I receive from parents. And I think even if the question itself doesn't necessarily apply to you or your children, the theme behind what I will be sharing probably can apply to many different types of situations. So the first question is, how do I know if my child may possibly need some outside help with professionals to deal with the stress and anxiety of the COVID-19 pandemic? So this is sort of like, when do I know that we need to get a little bit of extra help? The best thing I can do is to share with you that the word impact, significant impact. If there is an impact on from stress, anxiety, and depression, and you would know that because you would see changes in behavior, maybe sleeping a lot more than usual or sleeping a lot less than usual. That's impact on sleep. Having a much bigger appetite or barely being able to eat at all. That's an impact on diet and appetite. Excessively exercising when that was never important to someone, or someone who was exercising a lot, all of a sudden no longer doing that. Changes in hygiene, someone who would regularly shower and groom oneself in the morning, no longer doing that. I worked with someone the other day who admitted, I didn't shower for 3 days, and she's pretty clinically significantly depressed. And we know that partially because her hygiene has changed so dramatically. And then also withdrawal, which is a little tricky because we're forced to withdraw in some cases, but this would be sort of like you're in the home with a child who, or a teenager who didn't spend so much time in their room, but now is just up there with the door closed all the time. Or someone who used to participate in class and is no longer raising their hand. So that's the threshold for knowing when it's time to maybe seek some extra help, whether it be, through a counselor at school or someone in the community, or at least just to kind of flag the child and say, hey, what do you think about this? The impact in those areas. Another question that I get is, which social media platforms stand out as more protective of children, but have filters or offer more opportunity for creativity and real connections with others? So I have to be honest with you, I'm not the most tech savvy individual, and I learn a new program or platform every day that I work with kids, because there's just something new every day. The best social media platform is the one that you as a parent monitor. I don't necessarily have a preference. I'm also just because I see it all as a psychologist, I'm not a huge fan of social media in general and also for kids. But the best social media platform is any social media platform that is monitored by a parent. So some kids, when I say this in family therapy, the kids will be like, well, I want privacy. I don't want my parents seeing everything. And I say, if you want privacy, you can write things in a diary and lock it up. That's the old way of doing it. Social media is public by virtue of its name, social. And parents, you are part of the public, believe it or not. Even when they tell you that you are not, you are part of the public. So I strongly encourage you to be a monitor of social media. That's another way just to gauge if there is an impact. If you see, changes in how they're posting on social media, you can gauge if there's an increase in anxiety or depression. How do we set limits when teens feel they're old enough to make their own decisions on social media and certainly could bypass any controls if motivated to do so? Yeah, so there is a certain age at which kids they know more than we do, and they're going to be able to figure it out even if we, put some parental controls on there. So in that case, I recommend an electronics and social media contract, and that type of a contract would be entered into with parents and the child in particular. And it would specify the duration of use. So how many hours a day are you on an electronic device, or are you on a social media platform? What are the times of day that you're allowed, and are there any blockout times? School would be a blackout time, for example. An hour before bed would be a blackout time. And then what are the methods of usage? So what types of electronics are allowed, and what social media platforms would be allowed? And then both or all parties would sign. And sometimes with these types of contracts, they're contingency contracts. So it's sort of like, when you do this, then you get this. And you would know your child best to know if you have to add a contingency to it. If you think that they're savvy enough to maybe bypass some of the elements of the contract, then you could put a contingency in there. This one has come up a lot. How do I help my child who obsessively washes his hands due to COVID-19 anxiety? So before COVID-19, there were children who had concerns about germs and who, may have washed their hands excessively, as you'll see in some cases of OCD. Since COVID-19, we've seen a rapid increase in obsessive compulsive behavior related to fear of germs. So it's really important to use consistent messaging. So it would sound something like, hand washing is helpful in preventing the spread of COVID-19 when used for 20 seconds using soap and water after being in a public space. And I say to parents, memorize that. Hang it on your mirror and put it on your refrigerator, and maybe hang it in your child's bedroom too. Hand washing is helpful in preventing the spread of COVID-19 when utilized for 20 seconds, soap and water after being in a public space. So it doesn't count if you're home and you've just been doing things for a while. You don't need to do that. Public space. It doesn't matter if it doesn't feel clean after you've washed your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds. 20 seconds is the guideline. What a lot of times what's happening with children who are obsessively washing their hands because of COVID-19 anxiety is that they're waiting to feel clean. They're waiting to feel okay. And feelings are not always facts. And that's another good one to kind of like stick on the mirror. Feelings are not always facts. Facts are facts. So I work with kids on focusing on the facts and not the feelings. And remember, the fact is hand washing is helpful in preventing the spread of COVID-19 when utilized for 20 seconds in soap and water after being in a public space. That's it. I also sometimes say to kids, listen, we would never like overshoot a doctor's recommendation, would we? For example, if a doctor prescribes you, 100 milligrams of some certain medication that you're supposed to take to get better, you wouldn't aggressively double the dosage just because you feel like you should or because you feel like you're not getting better. You would follow the doctor's orders. So this is no different. The doctors say hand washing is helpful in preventing the spread of COVID-19. You kind of just repeat that mantra over and over again. Facts over feelings. Feelings are not always facts, and don't overshoot it. Okay, my child is on the computer over 75% of the day and mostly for schoolwork. how much blue light gets through if you have your computer set to night shift? And what do the studies say about blue light and also screen flickering and their effects on health? All right, so we knew this long before COVID. We're just on computers more with COVID. I think for every maybe 20 people that I see on the computer for an appointment, I see maybe one person in person here. So I spend my entire day on a screen with parents and with children. So that's why I have these. These are green glasses because after about 4 to 6 weeks of being on the computer all day, every day, when we were home earlier in the spring, I began to experience the classic signs and symptoms of having blue light impact. After a long day, I had a terrible headache. I was extremely irritable, just ask my family. And my brain felt like mush. I had brain fog. By the end of the day, I was having trouble forming sentences. And the only thing that helped was just to close my eyes and go to sleep and try again the next day, until I got these blue light blocking glasses, which I really do strongly recommend, especially if you have a child who is doing mostly remote work, which would be the older children. And then, doing the remote work on the computer and then doing the homework on the computer as well. And then also, most of our kids are spending their leisure time on an electronic device. So, when I'm doing parent interviews, sometimes they'll say, estimate for me about how many hours a day do you think that your kid is on some sort of an electronic device? And they'll say most. And they're right, because between school and homework and leisure time, it really truly is most of the day. So investing in a good pair of blue light blocking glasses would be a really great idea, especially for kids who are on for school during the day. But what happens when we use a screen within like an hour to an hour and a half before bedtime is it confuses our brain and it confuses our circadian rhythm. So over time, our bodies end up losing track of when we should sleep and when we should wake up, because the truth is our brains were designed to go to sleep when it's dark out. So technically we should all be asleep right now, but we're not because we have light and we have screens. So it's confusing enough with that. But if you add in this very artificial blue light, that really tricks your brain into staying awake. And that's why a lot of times I'll say to kids, you've got to cut off homework at least an hour before you go to sleep, because I need to make sure that you're getting to sleep and that you're also getting the quality of sleep that you need. We've already talked about how sleep is essential for immune health. And then screen time over 8 hours a day actually reduces the growth. It slows the growth of your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain right here. It's the part of our brain that's responsible for higher order functions like judgment and insight and impulse control and emotion regulation and attention. And all of those really important things that our students need to have every day. So if they're on the screen for more than 8 hours, you could be sure that that's really probably making it harder for them to pay attention the next day. And it's also depleting the mental reserves that they may have had. We all know, educators know this the most. The goal was never to not be in a classroom with these students. It just ended up happening this way. And so the goal will always be to have as much face time with these students as possible. The other suggestion that I have is to make sure that electronic devices are stored outside of a student's bedroom at night. Number one, it's just way too tempting. Many students sleep with their phones under their pillows, and so they'll hear the vibration of a text message coming in, or they'll be on a FaceTime call until 3 a.m. Many will. Having the computer on, some students fall asleep to like watching a movie on their computer, and so the light is still on for quite some time after they've fallen asleep. I really just recommend having a docking station in your home and storing all of the electronic devices outside of the bedroom. Remember, the bedroom is for changing clothes and for sleeping, and that would be my best recommendation related to that. How can I help my teenager understand the dangers of COVID-19 and take it seriously? Because teenagers love to take risks. It's kind of like part of the DNA. It's just part of the way that they're what's happening in the teenage years is that the brain it's undergoing a process called pruning. So it's sort of getting rid of some things that have been learned or overlearned in order to make space and make room for a lot of growth and a lot of expansion and a lot of new knowledge to be able to take place. And so and also because their prefrontal cortex here is not fully developed until they're 26 years old. So remember, we talked about that's the part of the brain that uses really good judgment and has good insight and proper, higher level reasoning skills. All of those things are needed when kind of doing a risk benefit analysis for COVID-19. So I don't think there's any one approach that would work better with a teenager over another. I think that parents and teachers know the kids best. And so I'm going to give you 4 different options for approaches. And then based on how well you know the teenager, you can apply the approach that you think would work best. So the first approach is the empathetic approach. We wear a mask and we socially distance to help others who are more vulnerable. Yes, I know you're young and you have you're impenetrable and nothing bad is going to happen. It's just the old people, but we do this to help others who are more vulnerable. The next approach is a contingency approach. So this would be for those individuals who just really work well with like behavior consequence. You do this, you get that. So it'd be like, hey, listen, if you wear a mask and socially distance, then you can continue to have access to your phone. If you don't, or if I find out that you went out with your friends, then you don't get to have access to your phone. Something along those lines. The access would be something that's considered a privilege by the child. There's also a collaborative problem-solving approach, and this is for the child who is able to use some pretty good reasoning skills, or at least has good verbal language. So it would involve the parent, asking, hey, what's the problem from your perspective? The problem is, all my friends are getting together, and I'm the only one who, is not allowed to go to this party, whatever it might be. And so you kind of listen and let them share that problem and all the details of that problem and all the implications of that problem for absolutely as long as they need to. And then when you feel like they're done and you feel like you've got it, you really understand, you kind of rephrase it so that you can show them that you really understood what they were saying. And then you say, okay, but the thing is, and you enter in very, very quickly, not too long, maybe 10 seconds or less, what the problem is. Okay, so the problem is, that I have a pretty significant underlying medical condition, whatever it might be. So the third step is to come up with a solution that works for the child and also works for the parent. And this probably is the one that might take just the longest, because what the outcome of this is that both parties walk away, the parent and the child will walk away feeling like their problem was solved, feeling like it was, they won, I got what I wanted. If both parties walk away in that way, then you engage in a pretty positive collaborative problem-solving situation. And then the last one would be for your long-term planner, someone who really thinks ahead and is not just in the present moment. So here you go. The sooner the virus is controlled, the sooner these guidelines are lifted. I don't like it any more than you do, but hey, if you want to get this over just as fast as I do, just do this for a little while longer. So you can see how it appeals to different sides of people, and you have to kind of figure out which child you have and which side you would want to appeal to. This is a big one. How do we deal with the feelings of a senior, or honestly, you could input anything there, an athlete. How do you deal with the feelings of a senior who is feeling that everything he or she has worked for 12 years has been taken away? I hear this a lot. Okay. In order to deal with those feelings that child might be having, it's important to understand what the feeling is. It's sadness. It may look like giving up, but what it really is cumulative grief, which is the feeling of loss when there's a chain of negative events, one after another, following a loss, right? So it started with, how scary COVID-19 was back in March. And then it was being pulled away from teachers and friends and being home all day. And then it was finding out, hey, I'm not going to be able to have my junior high graduation. I'm not going to be able to have my prom. I'm not going to be able to have this or that. And that it's the cumulative effect of all of those things that creates that cumulative guilt. And so just doing some basic research on the stages of grief. There's 5 very well-known stages, and They don't always go in this order, and it can be very fluid, but denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So if you see an outburst from your child, you might want to ask yourself, is this anger? Is this frustration, or is this grief, the feeling of loss when there's a chain of negative events? And it could be just another loss, like I don't get to go to this party, something that seems insignificant, but it's part of a chain of negative events that contributes to the cumulative grief. If you see, your child crying, you might assume that they're sad or depressed, but you would want to ask yourself, is this cumulative grief? What's important to convey is that grief is a natural phenomenon. So it's important for us as the adults, but it's also important for the kids to know that there's absolutely no way that we could rush the process along. And we shouldn't try to rush it along anyway. Grief is not something that we need to fear. It's actually something that does actually resolve itself faster if it's done sometimes with someone, if there's open conversation about it, and if it's not pressured to be over as soon as possible. So just to validate your child's experience of loss in all the big ways to any of the small ways, something that might seem small to us is probably feeling very big to them. And to talk about it with them, to actually use the language, this is a grief process, and to help them to understand what is cumulative grief. What are some strategies for parents to encourage their child who refuses to turn on the camera during a Zoom session? Good question. I have a hard time answering that one without knowing more information. So I'll give you the questions that you would want to ask yourselves and ask your kids. What's the function of the behavior? What is the purpose of turning the camera off? Probably one of two things. Number one, is the student trying to avoid something by turning the camera off? What would it be? Is it the face-to-face interaction? Is it the blue light, the screen hurting the student's eye? What is the child trying to avoid? And if it's not avoidance, then it could be obtaining something, getting something. Instead of avoiding it, I'm trying to get something out of this. What are they trying to get out of it? Well, many of the kids that I'm working with are trying to do things that are unrelated to schoolwork. So they'll turn off the camera so that they can be on their phone, or they can watch a movie, or do something that's unrelated to schoolwork. So in order to know how to help a child with a camera during a Zoom session, first we have to answer the question of what's the function of that behavior in the first place. And it's going to be either avoidance or obtaining something. Why is it actually necessary to have the camera on if it causes extreme stress and anxiety for some kids? Well, one of the questions I would have to answer that is, were stress and anxiety present in school-based social situations before remote learning? So did the student really not try to raise his or her hand in class? Was the student reluctant to go up to the teacher after class and ask for help? Things like that, because we now as parents, we may be observing things that we think are new, and we think are just a function of the logistics surrounding COVID-19 and learning, but it may actually be something that was present to begin with, we just were not as aware of. But overall, you would just want to talk with teachers and administrators to find out flexibility on the issue. And you could get a counselor, a school counselor involved to help answer some of these questions of what's the function of the behavior? Are you trying to get something out of it? Are you trying to avoid it? And see if there's any accommodations that can be made in that case. What do we know about suicide in the era of COVID-19? Well, one predictor of how well teens in particular do after a large scale event like this is how well their parents are doing. So one of the greatest things, again, trying to take control of what we as adults have control over, and specifically parents of children have control over, is we have control over how we conduct ourselves. We have control over whether or not we model a fixed versus a growth mindset. We have control over whether we model healthy coping strategies versus unhealthy coping strategies. And so if they're observing adults in their life to be resilient and to have grit in the face of adversity, that is going to be a predictor of better outcomes for teenagers in particular. It's okay for your child to see you stressed and worried, because really everybody can be. What's important is for them to see you cope with it in healthy ways. That's the most important thing. Social connection as it relates to suicide is of paramount importance, because there will be ways for people who know you well to spot that something's just not quite right. So that's why it's important for parents to be really very vigilant in terms of observing their child and changes in behavior. And also being in school is very helpful because teachers know their students well and can also observe changes in behavior. Having meaning and purpose in daily life, being able to wake up in the morning and say, I was put here on earth for a reason. There's a reason that I'm here. There's a reason that I'm going through this. And there's a reason I'm supposed to do this day today. That is a huge protective factor for suicide, from depression, from anxiety. So, and being able to identify for kids, what are your innate gifts and talents? What is special about you helps them to find meaning and purpose in life. So one of the, risk factors for depression in particular, and also suicide and hopelessness would be not having a sense of meaning and purpose in life, and not being able to answer the question, what are your unique gifts and talents? So really having conversations like that and pointing, teachers pointing those things out, and parents pointing those things out is going to be of the utmost importance. I did have a couple of additional questions come in that I did not put on my slides, and I will just answer them very, very briefly. Someone had asked about, how to help a child who felt nervous about going to school before COVID-19 hit, to the point of even kind of having like that, I call it nervous belly, like stomach aches in the morning. But now, feels even more nervous about it, and not knowing kind of how to help, and when do I have them stay home and when do I not have them stay home? Well, if there is a child who has a history of school anxiety or school avoidance, the goal is to have them go to school. So again, feelings are not always facts. So, it's about talking with kids about how you might feel nervous, but the fact is, you're safe. This is a safe place. We're taking all the precautions, whatever the facts are, you would focus on those. It would be counterproductive to have a child who is already school avoidant or had school anxiety, who now has exacerbated school anxiety because of COVID. It would be counterproductive to keep that child home, because it will only make it more difficult to have the child go regularly to school, certainly during COVID-19 and even following the pandemic. Absolutely. Another way to talk about this with kids is, if they're feeling any sense of nervousness or panic about being in school, about being around other people, possibly being sick, talking with them, a lot of times therapists will say, okay, let's just figure out how we can calm down. We're going to do deep breathing. We're going to do things to calm down. Well, the interesting thing is, once you're revved up like that, if you're super revved up from anxiety and maybe even on the verge of having a panic attack, it's just silly to say calm down, because you would if you could, but you can't. So the idea is not to calm down. The idea is to talk to your kids about how, hey, you feel that feeling inside where you're feeling really revved up. That's your body preparing you for a challenge. And again, there's that growth mindset. It's kids will be like, oh, I'm nervous, and so my stomach hurts. And you're like, no, you're about to enter a challenging situation. And your body is so cool that it's preparing you for that. And it teaches kids to embrace some of those like nervous butterflies or panic feelings that they might have, and realize, hey, this is actually good for me because it's going to help me to take on this challenge a little bit better. A final word for the night. There's no right or wrong way to grieve, as we talked about, and there's no right or wrong way to maneuver through a pandemic. Pretty much all of us, this is new to everyone, including our kids. I really encourage you to use caution if you consider vilifying others in front of your children. I don't know how a virus became political, but it did. And few things in life create such strong emotions than political beliefs, especially in an election year. So what I've seen happen a lot, a very interesting thing happened this year. I've never had more kids, young children in elementary school, talk to me about politics. That was concerning. I appreciate having children open their world to information. But like we talked about in the beginning, sometimes too much information or age inappropriate information is too much. And sometimes for kids, it is too much, especially on top of the pandemic. So what I've suggested for parents is viewing differences of opinion about how to handle COVID, because we still have them, viewing those differences of opinion as boiling down to individuals, all of us, having the same priorities, but just prioritizing them in a different sequence. So I joke with people, I say, listen, 99.9% of our population are not sociopaths. 99.9% of people are not going around thinking, I'm not going to wear a mask because I'm trying to get people sick. So more than likely, there's a sequencing of priorities that's happening. So people who are really strong proponents of wearing a mask and social distancing are saying, you know, what's most important to me right now? What's most important to me is protecting the vulnerable and kind of holding myself accountable and responsible for other people. And then there's another group of people, and those are the people that maybe feel less comfortable wearing a mask and feel like social distancing may not be for them. And what they're doing is they're prioritizing personal responsibility. They're saying, I am going to be personally responsible for myself. If I choose to stay home, it's because I am choosing to stay well. I'm not going to hold someone else accountable for getting me sick because I chose to go out and to do X, Y, or Z things. In both cases, if I were to ask both sets of people, hey, listen, did you care about other people? Because 99.9% people are not sociopathic, the true and honest, genuine answer would be, yes, I care about other people. If I asked a follow-up question, I said, do you believe in personal responsibility? Personal responsibility meaning sort of like, you know, you wouldn't hold someone else accountable for your own, you know, for your own personal outcomes. Most people would say, yeah, no, I take responsibility for my behavior. I take responsibility for my outcomes. Who's right? I think neither. It's just a sequencing of priorities. Both have the same priorities. Both care about people. Both believe in personal responsibility. But in one case, there's a prioritization of one over the other. In the other case, the other is prioritized. And when we can look at, and this goes for COVID-19, this goes for pretty much any difference of opinion, when you can look at things from that perspective, hey, maybe we do actually care about the same things. We're just prioritizing how we do the caring differently. Then there's a lot more harmony among us. And I do believe that the kids have picked up on a lot of the tension from a lot of things that have happened this year. And so the more that we can really model for them this idea that this is how we as a family choose to do it this way, and this is how they as a family choose to do it that way. It's, you know, works for the kid who's saying, all my friends can go to the party except for me. Well, this is how we as a family choose to do it this way. And this is how they as a family choose to do it that way. No one's necessarily right or wrong. This is how we are choosing to prioritize the same priorities or sequence the same priorities. Okay, so additional resources, if you're interested, would be the National Association of School Psychologists and the American Psychological Association. Both organizations have put out really, great work on how to help kids to cope with COVID-19, and also educators and parents as well. And then there are some references that are used here and that were used as part of this presentation. And this is just my contact information. If you have any follow-up questions for me after this presentation, you're certainly welcome to reach me here at Psychology Wellness Practice. I'm going to just check the chat box quickly. It is 8:01, which is when I promised that I would be finished.
Dr. Smicken, I can actually do that for you. So folks, and maybe it might be easier if you want to stop sharing your screen, then we can get some questions from the PAC. So PAC members, if you want to enter any questions in at this point, I can start off with one already. And just out of curiosity, Dr. Smicken, do you have this slideshow available could we have a copy of this and perhaps share it?
Sure, I will share it to you after via
Great.
email after the presentation, yes.
Great, thank you. So PAC members, if you have any questions, feel free to enter those into the chat and we can ask Dr. Smitkin any closing questions.
If it's okay, I'm just going to go off mute and just say a couple of things.
Sure.
I just wanted to really thank you for this presentation because it was very rounded and holistic and honestly is quite lost on society. And it's really important for students, parents, and everyone to understand why this dialogue is so important. And your first slide, I liked how you led the discussion with what's within our control that we can do. And that is so vitally important. And pandemic or no pandemic, the students, they need to learn when they get older how to cope. And while it's really hard for them now, and it's unfortunate at such a young age, they have to, kind of learn earlier that they'll be stronger because of it. And I also just wanted to add that whole slide that you had and all those holistic bullets, exercise and sleep and diet, healthy gut. I mean, we forget how important all of those different things. And to me, I call it a toolbox. And for my kids, I tell them, to recognize how they're feeling, accept it. It's okay. Give it a name if they're angry, if they feel sad. I also tell them to use, I'm no expert by any means, but to kind of use, get some sleep. You got to, watch what you're eating. Maybe the carbohydrates are affecting them. Sometimes a little bit too much of that. And also to just talk. And that toolbox, it might be to call a friend. It might be to call a relative. It might be to go around the block on your bicycle. All those different toolbox, methods. It's so very important. So I really appreciate that you focused on that and that, we were able to share that because I think it's very beneficial. And I just wish that the message is that to continue to do that and rely less on what's happening in the media because it's all focused on a lot of, unfortunately, very, very confusing topics. So thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. I do see some very nice comments and I appreciate those comments. They help me to do my job better when you let me know like kind of what worked for you and what resonated for you. So I appreciate that very much. And thank you again so very much for inviting me to be a part of this night.
Sure, thank you. So, sorry, Mr. Kaur, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
I just want to quickly say, thank you and thank you for your partnership. Mental health and social emotional well-being is a pillar and a priority in our district, and we really appreciate the partnership and continued strategies to help our students grow and our families feel supported. So, Mr. Kaur, thank you.
Yes, and Dr. Smitkin, I'm always so appreciative of the assistance and support that you provide the North County Central School District as an institution, but much more appreciative of the wonderful support you provide to our families and our students. So thank you. This was wonderful. It was so informative and so helpful, and I'm very grateful that we will also have access to the slides. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Jen.
Thank you very much again.
Take care. Just as, there's just a few things that I would like to bring together. So, Brett, I became aware of your question just before the meeting here. So, you had a question on, herd immunity at Bout Hills. We're pretty far away from that. You can go on the New York State COVID-19 report card and you can just type in, you go to public schools and you type in the search engine, Bout Hills or North Colony. So I can give you these statistics. So since September 8, we have had, and I'll just use Bout Hills as an example, and that's the one you asked. We have had 17 cases. Of those 17, 8 were on campus in person and 9 were off. I think that's an interesting statistic there. So, if you take a look at those numbers right there, that number of 17 cases is, around 6% total, but that's since September 8th. If you look at the 14-day average, we've had one case over 14 days. So that is a fraction of a percent. So another fact that I could talk about too is that we have completed our surveillance testing of 10% of our K-6 students. And the second week in February, we will be doing our 712 students. But we randomly selected of that in-person group a total of about, I'm using some round numbers here, of about 160, excuse me, 150 students in grades K3 and about 110 students, and these are students and staff, I should correct myself, in 4-6. So about with about 260 subjects, we tested them with the state, New York State Health Department provided rapid tests, and we had no positives in our test group. So this was reported on in the Times Union. So I just, want to give you that for some background here. But we do believe that in general, schools are safe places to be. There was a recent CDC study, I think, that just came out within the last 24 to 48 hours that verified that. So again, I would just like to report that out. We are about to begin our second semester on Monday, February 2nd. I'd just like to remind that the temporary remote period that we instituted after the holidays on January 4th and extended for another 2 weeks until the second semester, there will be no more temporary remote. So we're asking families, and we're expecting that families follow their choice that they made when they were surveyed back in December. And that survey was only for individuals who were choosing to make a change in learning environment. That meant going from remote to in-person or coming out of in-person back to remote. So that means once you're in that environment, you should stay in that environment. Again, at the K-6, there will be no remoting in as an option. We will work with families who are placed in quarantine. We'll work with families who have individual extraordinary circumstances. That is a fact. In the 712 schools, in particular in 7-8, we have a separate remote school. For families who are in quarantine, if you are in the 7-8 school or you're in the 9-12 school, if you're in quarantine, you may remote in, but we're asking everybody to honor their choice. So that means that if you are in the hybrid school, and this is particularly true with 9-12, if you are in the hybrid school, you can't choose to remote in one day, come in the other day, and so on and so forth. It's either a commitment made to being exclusively in remote, or it's a commitment made to being in the hybrid, but that so that is where we begin at second semester on Monday. And I just want to stress that, the 2-week temporary remote has ended, or it's actually morphed into a 4-week temporary remote period, but that will end as of Monday. And so we will be back into our choices at that time. Let me see here. Dina, can you let junior high parents know when schedules for next quarter will be posted? Yes. We'll make sure that that's out there. And I see that. Janet, is there a threshold for numbers that will have 4 through 6 teachers begin live instruction for all classes again. We have not, no, I would say we don't have a threshold, Jenna, but we certainly will be evaluating that. And, you know, when we get to a point, or when we get to a point where either the infection rate is down or there's a different take on how we quarantine individuals, those will be factors that will determine whether we make that change back or not. We made that change in there really as a mitigator against having to shut down due to staffing caused by the impact of quarantining. Many of you also have probably seen that at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the governor announced that high risk winter sports and the higher risk fall 2 sports such as football, volleyball, and cheerleading will be allowed. But that decision ultimately as to whether those sports would be allowed was deferred to the counties. So Albany County released guidance. I believe Schenectady County has released guidance, and we're still waiting on the other counties. We're told that other counties will follow with similar guidance, but there are thresholds there for hospitalization, 4% threshold for infection rate, and various protocols that schools have to put in. So with the infection rate threshold that was established in the Albany County document that was released on Wednesday evening, that threshold of being 4%, Albany County and just about every county in the region does not hit that threshold. Again, it's up to individual counties to decide that. So if they are using the 4% positivity rate as the metric on that, no county would be able to bring these sports together. So we will try to work on and try to control what we can control, and that is in the establishment of protocols and the like. And if there is a subsequent change in any information we receive from the county, we will react accordingly. But right now, under the current guidance, schools in Albany County are not able to compete in these higher risk sports for the winter season, which was scheduled to start on February 1. Are there any questions here? So I am going to call another PAC meeting shortly, perhaps before the break, perhaps on Thursday, and that would be February 11. And I'd just like to touch on a few items, including the second semester, and including a preview of the upcoming budget season in the state, and just deal with any questions and concerns that you have at this time. I thought it was, given the fact that we are in the midst of a very difficult time and have, experienced some difficult times with our national situation and our increasing numbers in COVID-19 throughout the region, state, and nation, that it was really a good time to have Dr. Smitkin come to us. And I want to thank Mr. Barden, who actually made that suggestion, that we have Dr. Smitkin come and address a PAC meeting and be used really as a resource for the entire district. So thank you, Mr. Barden. Your suggestion was very timely, and we're very grateful to you and your work in pupil services as head of the pupil services department, bringing Dr. Smitkin in. So thank you.
Sure, you're very welcome.
Any other questions? Well, bundle up. It's cold tomorrow and throughout the weekend. We are in, the throes of our coldest day in January. And as always, I am filled with gratitude every time I meet with this group. And thank you very much. And we did pick up 65 viewers tonight, and hopefully we will be sharing these slides, posting them on our website, and it represents yet another resource for parents and for students too, as we work through this very difficult time. So in the spirit of Dr. Smitkin, through this opportunity to learn and grow. So take care, everybody, and thanks again, and have a great weekend. We'll see you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.